Lisa. Cake and donuts. Cake and donuts.
कैसे जीत गई? आते जा रहा है
Good morning, everybody. Sorry, it's afternoon in India. Okay.
Hi, Neeraj.
Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Neeraj. Good morning, Rachel. Good morning, Elsa.
Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon.
So we shall start.
Can start?
Yes. Shall we start?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A few guidelines to be mentioned before starting the formal.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Bharathion School of Social Work. Webinar will begin in a few minutes. There are a few guidelines to be followed. Kindly make sure that you have muted and turned off your microphone and video during the session. Please avoid unnecessary interference while the speaker presents. Please cooperate with us, filling out the feedback form circulated during the end of the session. If you have any queries, please ask through live chat. Please cooperate with us for the smooth conduct of the webinar. A very good afternoon to one and all. Health, wealth, and wisdom come to those who embrace the morning and make full use of it. We, Bharathion School of Social Work, gladly welcome you all to the international webinar on social work competencies in England. Social work competencies help social workers to train themselves through a set of associated practice, behavior, and methods to achieve the competencies needed for a professional social worker. To enlighten on this, we have three eminent experienced personalities. Before we move on to the structured presentation, let me introduce and welcome each one of them.
Rachel Kumar.
whose knowledge and expertise in the field of education and practice has been utilized to mold social worker trainees in UK. Her educational domains includes Masters in Social Work, Social Policy and Planning, Honours in Social Policy Research and System Practice, and Diploma in Management. Her professional roles as team manager, social work academician, practice assessor, student placement lead, and quality assessor has contributed remarkably in capacitating aspirants of professional social work. I welcome you, ma'am, to the webinar.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Neeraj Kumar, a qualified social worker and founder of an international development charity in UK, had served as advisor for GA Summit for international funds. His contribution to the child protection and social work in English local authority is remarkable. Children and remain his primary concern, including relationship-based practice and trauma-based practice. I welcome you, sir. Anand Kumar, a vibrant personality who holds Masters in Social Work from Mahatma Gandhi University, India, currently working as a practice educator at Royal Holloway University, England, has 15 years of experience with children in need of care and protection and emancipation of trafficked refugees and asylum seekers. Specialized in community development, his professional career began as the Nodal Officer of Childline Indian Foundation. His experience in community setting in India has contributed to develop professional social work interventions with different target groups. I welcome you, sir. Now I invite the team.
Thank you.
Now I invite the team to take over the session.
Bharathion, can we have the slides on?
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for inviting us to speak today, especially to Assistant Professor Elsa, who's and the team who've organised this webinar. Today we're going to be talking about social work competencies in England, and myself, Neeraj and Anand will introduce ourselves properly in a moment. If we can move to the next slide, please. So today's webinar, we're going to be discussing what does it take to be a social worker in England. We're going to talk about 3 key frameworks that are essential for social workers to use in England, which are the Professional Capabilities Framework, Social Work England Professional Standards, and the British Association of Social Work Code of Ethics. And we'll all be contributing to the presentation. At the end, we'll have some time to take questions from yourselves to consider how we implement these frameworks in practice. Thank you. If we can move to the next slide. So my name is Rachel Kumar. I am a social work lecturer and practice educator in London. I qualified as a social worker in 2007, and mainly since then I've been working in children's social work as in child protection. I've been a team manager for 5 years, so led a team of social workers, and now I work in universities helping to train students who are working towards the social work qualification. And I'm qualified to assess students. So students in England, when they do their social work training, they have to undertake practice placements in the field. And so I will support them and help them to complete their social work portfolios and to assess the quality of the placements that they are on during their course. Thank you. So I'll just pass you to Neeraj, who will introduce himself. We can move to the next slide.
Hi, first of all, I would like to thank you to Elsa for organizing this webinar. And I just wanted to share that I'm currently working in a role in London Borough of Croydon as advanced practitioner in the looked after children's team. And my area of specialism is unaccompanied asylum seeker children who are coming from different conflicted areas of the world. And my keen interest is in systemic thinking and trauma-based practice. And prior to my qualification, I had worked in India for 7 years in education sectors, and I also had founded an international development charity in the UK. Hopefully, I'll be of some use in this webinar. I'll pass this slide to Anand, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the third Kumar in this group. I'm Miss Anand Kumar. I started my social work career in 2000 after passing out from Mahatma Gandhi University, and quite proud that I'm a part of initiating childline activities in Cochin, and I also work with children and street children in Bangalore before moving to England to pursue social work practice in 2006. And since then, I've been working with asylum-seeking, trafficked, refugee children, and that's my specialization, actually speaking. I'm also a practice educator, completed my course from Royal Holloway University. And I will be rather working as a bridge, if you don't, sharing my experience as a social worker who worked in India and in England. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we move to the next slide? Okay, so let's start by considering what is social work in England, because it may be different to the social work we practice in India. So the British Association of Social Workers, which is an organisation that is like the Association for Social Workers in England, they define social work as aiming to improve people's lives by helping with social and interpersonal difficulties. We promote people's human rights and well-being, and we protect children and adults with support needs from harm. Thank you. Can we move to the next slide, please?
All right, this is me. This is not from any researchers. This is my experience and what I have experienced after moving from India to England. And I'm one of those social workers who actually trained in India and moved to UK. And I can confirm you guys that I've seen a lot of social workers who came from India, trained in India, and moved to India and doing really well, excellent work after completed in the UK, and they left a footprint for us to follow. All I want to say that social work in England is not that difficult for social workers who actually trained in India. We are learning exactly the same theories, skills, techniques, which would help us to practice our social work in England. Yeah, I hope everyone is feeling, because I managed to be a part of one of your webinars earlier, which was actually discussing about the pandemic, social work approaches during pandemic. And I believe that everybody is actually safe and well in India. The news we are getting from India is not really great. The background of this webinar, because I was talking to Dr. Elsa Mary Jacob on a casual talk. She was asking me to have a discussion with her students to share my experience. Dr. Elsa Mary Jacob knows my background, and I thought that's a good idea. I can share my experience with her. But later on, 2 weeks later, I realized that it became a big seminar. So many people are attending. Then I spoke to Neeraj, who's my colleague. Amazing personality. He always, I've seen his eyes flashing every time I talk about India, and he talks about giving back to India every time we talk about India. And then we have, and I really thank you, Neeraj, for being a part of it. And then we have Rachel Kumar. She's a full package. She's got experience as a social work practitioner, and now she's a teacher. She would be the main presenter today, and I'm happy that we are all here. And I also want to thank you, Sheena Philip, Head of Services, Elsa Mary Jacob, Arya, and Trazen, who was actually helping us with the slides. Okay, going back to my slide and what I actually see as a social worker, what kind of difference I see in social work practice in England. Okay, social work is a practice-based profession in the UK, like elsewhere in the world, where we actually use social work values, principles, and techniques for people to obtain tangible services to achieve an informed outcome. We use different techniques: counseling, psychotherapy, group works, all these kind of techniques we have learned. But apart from that, to practice social work, we require knowledge of human development, behavior, social and economic and cultural institution and interaction of all those things. So when I come to, that's one of the difficulties I had, because I'm coming from a different culture. I came here, I have to adapt to the new situation in the UK. The second bit of the slide is social work in England thrives on multi-agency partnership setting. Everywhere else in the world, social workers cannot work as a superhuman. We cannot do everything on our own. So, however, in England, for instance, where I work with unaccompanied minors, the young people who are coming from abroad and who doesn't have anybody in the UK. So when they come to the UK, I cannot provide all the services on my own. So when a child comes from abroad, I network with agencies such as Immigration Department that works with modern slavery and trafficking police, solicitors, refugee council, different counselors specialized in different areas such as torture and abuse, laws, bereavement and separate. That's one of the big words we actually use when we work with asylum-seeking children, because they've been separated from their family. They probably have a loss in their family. They probably have a death in their family. And we also work with mental health department in general, and education. So the advantage what we have in the UK, each department knows their role when it comes to a child in need with their specific needs. So it helps social workers to actually work to, if we speak to a child and we know this is the need, our head automatically goes to a certain agency asking for help. So it is a multi-agency partnership setting. That's how we work here. The profession provides clear career progression pathway to social workers. So that's going to be discussed in details by Rachel Kumar. But I can say that when you come to the UK, we will get career progression and we'll get guidance on that. This will be discussed later on. The next one is social research contribute to evaluate theories and approach. Like everywhere else, like I was listening to one of your seminars, as I said, in an unprecedented situation, we approach with unprecedented ways. Like we have new theories coming up on what is it called? How we social workers work on a situation like pandemic. Similarly, when we do social work in the UK, our reports are actually shared with Department of Education. They continuously analyze and evaluate our reports and come up with theories and approaches that will help us to approach our client group in a better way. And our social work practice is mostly based on casework models, with some elements of group work and community organization, which is very little. So you should understand that it's actually a casework model in the UK. We don't have any specialization like medical social work, community development, and child and family. It's sort of a generic social work training. Social work practice in England is mostly statutory services with prescriptive duties and established guidance and protocols. Basically, these agencies like Social Work in England, government, judiciary, they give us guidance to perform our duties, and everything is actually on specific formats, specific time scale. We have to provide our reports on specific time. We have to complete our assessment on specific time. We have to convene certain meetings on specific time. This is one of the stress the social workers meet here as a social worker, because if you fail to meet this the timelines, you'll be and follow the statutory guidelines, you'll be in trouble. And the next point is social workers are accountable for the decisions and liable for damage claim. We work with individuals. We work with people with complex needs. And your practice needs to be really focused on them. You should understand what are their needs and the kind of practice you provide based on their needs. Any damage you make to your client group, you're liable for that. If something goes really bad, there are chances that you lose your registration and your right to work as a social worker in the UK. Access to number of resources. this is sort of a comparative thing that I'm talking about, because I worked in India with Childline in Kashmir about 3 years, and I rescued about 3,000 children from the street. And the difference I feel that when a child comes in with numerous needs, we can actually link them with different resources, which is actually already established in this country. And this is one of the, but we still, in social workers in England, say that we don't have enough resources, but that's not true. Based on where I come from, we have a lot of resources available here. And the last one is social work in England is considered as one of the most difficult, stressful jobs. And due to this demand and public perception, because, I'll talk about that later, it doesn't attract brighter students. People try to walk away from social work even they get qualified. And there's one thing which is not in the slide. Probably my colleagues won't agree with me when I say this. We talk about social justice a lot. And I always think that social justice and statutory framework are always has a conflict. Because when social workers stick to this framework, sometimes they forget about people come from ethnic minority. I'll give you an example. We have a different way to discipline our children, isn't it? When we come to this country, especially asylum-seeking families who are coming from deprived countries and war zones, they use the same way to discipline their children, which is not acceptable. And because they are coming from abroad, they don't know how things work here. The children, when they go to school, they have child protection leads. The children in this country are aware about their rights, and they are sort of empowered. When they come home, they get disciplined in the way they were disciplined in their own country. The children will come and make complaints to the school, and this will get escalated. So sometimes I feel that I could be wrong. Too much of framework input actually put the social justice in back burner when it comes to ethnic minority. This is not in the slide, but this is my feeling as somebody who's actually coming from ethnic minority group. And the last bit, state and judiciary play a key role in shaping social work practices. We have a lot of cases that actually went to court arena and that actually redefined social work practice in the UK. If anybody wants to read about some of the cases that actually discuss in the case court, I'm more than happy to provide those information for your readings. You can actually contact me on my email address, which will be provided towards the end of this presentation. And in my team, I work with asylum seekers. We follow. Okay, well, let me give you the scenario. Those who come to this country as asylum seekers, their chances of getting a status in this country, asylum in this country, is higher when they claim to be a child. So we have experience, since I've been working in this team for 15 years. We have experienced so many adults coming and claiming to be children. So we carry out a process called merchant complaint, which is actually a judgment based on a case. So if you want to read about age, the procedure of age assessment is actually provided by merchant complaint, a judgment from the court. So we can provide that judgment as well if you really want to read through. And that's it from my side as a social worker who has a bit of experience in both sides. So I'm going to move on to next slide, Neeraj.
Can we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. Sorry, Neeraj, we can't hear you. I think you're muted. Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
When you will be registered as a social worker in England, you can have a range of client groups or settings, and that's what I'm going to discuss here. Personally, local authority and council. What does that mean is local authorities and local government, they have their own budgets and they recruit their own social workers. So there are 32 boroughs in London. They all governed, people who are working in children's settings, they're all governed by Children's Act. So they're going to follow that. But each local authority has their own policies and procedures as well. In some of the areas, you wouldn't require additional qualification, but in some, you might need some. So I will discuss all of them. So local authority and council, you don't have to have additional qualifications. You can apply for social worker in local authorities, and you can be a youth offender. You can work in a youth offending team. That team work with young people who are under 18 and involved in criminal activities. You can work in probation service. This service provides services to the young people, adults who are above 18 who are involved in criminal activities. And you can work as a social worker in school, as a safeguarding lead. This is non-statutory role, early help. So you can work in schools, like Anand briefly touched in a previous slide, that the social worker in schools, if a child disclose that he or she is abused at home, that can be escalated to the higher level. And there are roles in mental health and hospital, but these roles might need additional qualifications such as mental health qualification, psychotherapy, or clinical education. You cannot counsel anybody under social work degree. And whether you pass out in India or in the UK, it is a generic degree. So whether you do BA, MA, or any short-term path to social work, you all will be under protected license of social work. And you can pick and choose with elderly. You can work with elderly people, vulnerable adults, the homeless, families in need, children who have been abused, children who have been criminally exploited, trafficked, children who have been sexually exploited, or domestic abuse. So there are a range of client groups you can work with. And the beauty of it is that as you practice, your area of interest get narrower and narrower. Like me and Anand are currently working with unaccompanied asylum seekers. They're a very small group of clients who coming from war zones or conflicted part of the world. So you can pick and choose. It's very diverse. But can we move on to the next slide, please? Can we move on to the next slide, please?
I'm not sure. I can't see the presentation. I don't know whether it's...
Could you change the slide, please? Move on to the next slide, please. Bryson.
Okay, while the slide is being changed, I will carry on. So my next slide is about what kind of profession social work is. I mean, it's here in England. It is a very stressful profession. There was a research done by British Association of Social Workers in 2018, and approximately 3,000 social workers participated in that research. And out of 3,000, 61% of social workers said that they're going to leave the role within next 16 months. So that is very telling. That means it's a very, very stressful profession. And so there is a reason why it is stressful. So exactly what are the challenges in this profession? So there are three main challenges which came out of the research. The first one is high caseload leading to stress. Hello?
Neeraj, it looks like we have to wait for the slide to come in.
Okay. In the meantime, should we interact with the people who are here?
Can I just ask you, because we work, with different settings in India, like hospitals and,
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
We're back now. Oh, that's good.
Okay. Yeah, here in this slide you can see that 61% of social workers said that they're going to leave the profession in 16 months. Please, can you move to next slide, please? Thank you. So the first challenge, or there were many challenges. The first, the most, the three main challenges of the professions are high caseload leading to stress. What does that mean? That means that Anand said it is a casework practice. So you will be assigned young people or adults or families to your caseload, and you'll be liable. So I work in children department. So I have 17 young people to look after. So that comes with a lot of responsibility and a lot of statutory guideline I have to meet. And there's a lot of bureaucracy. So for example, I have to visit a young person once in 6 weeks, and I have to update their care plan every 6 months. I have to be part of looked after children's review, and I have to update all the professionals working around professionals about the child and advocate for them. So it requires a lot of time, and you will have to produce a quality evidence. That means that it has to be evidence-based practice. That means that you have all the things which are all the intervention you have done with your young people or adults, and not only that, it has to be quality recording, and it is expected to be a good quality of writing, not very judgmental, and it has to be more creative, like more expressive rather than fact finding. There are facts as well, but when it comes to describing a child, you have to be very creative and mostly positive. The next challenge is the impact of austerity. That means that currently we're going through a lot of financial crisis. Each local authority goes under immense financial pressure, so they have less amount of social workers and higher the caseload. And it not only impacts the social worker, but on your supervision, that means from your manager during your caseload is when that becomes less and less, because there's not enough time to discuss each cases, and also about your mental health, because when you're working with challenging cases, you feel a little bit pressured and low, and you would want to have somebody to talk to get a clear directions. So at times you might not find that support from your manager. It all looks dark and gloomy here, so I wanted to brighten up a little bit. Can we move on to the next slide? Thank you. As you can see that in this slide, that there is a high demand of social workers, and you'll be happy to know that the vacancy rates remain high, on an average more than 5,500 in children's and family social work annually. This is the report came from Department of Education 2019, very recent report. And in a home office occupational list, social work is comes in it, and you can get tier 2 visa, and local authority goes to India and they recruit social worker from universities and different settings. Anand is the prime example of that. He's recruited by London Borough of Croydon, and on entering into the UK, the social worker are required to register with social work before they can practice as a social worker. So what does that mean? That means that you need to have a social work qualification in India, and you will have to have experience of at least 2 to 3 years within that setting, and there is a specific domains you have to evidence in order to register under Social Work England, which Rachel is going to share with us in the next slide. Please, can we
Thank
move
you.
to-
Can we move on to the next slide? Okay, thank you, Neeraj. So let us consider now what are some of the regulations that UK social workers are required to follow. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So the first one I'm going to talk to you about is the Professional Capabilities Framework. And this is the overarching framework for social work education and professional development in England. And the kind of the essence of it is described in this icon. So it's quite complicated, but I'll just explain it to you. So at the top, you can see there is the first bar states 3 words: purpose, practice, and impact. And these are essentially the reason why we do social work in the UK. So everything we do as social workers has to have a purpose, it has to demonstrate our good practice, and it has to have an impact on service users, on the organisations that we work with, and on others, so our professional leadership. So these, we call these super domains: purpose, practice, and impact. Beneath that, you can see there is another bar which has got 9 different sections, and each one of these sections is a domain. So there are 9 domains in our education framework, and I'll just read them out briefly. So we've got values and ethics, diversity and equalities, rights and justice, knowledge, critical reflection and analysis, skills and intervention, context and organisations, professional leadership, and professionalism. And if you look at the bottom of the diagram, bottom of the fan, you'll see there are some bars going across, going upwards. So this is right at the bottom, it's the point of entry into training. So at this level of training, there are a set of qualities that you're required to demonstrate, social workers students are required to demonstrate. And as we move up, so you can see for each bar, it becomes increasingly more complex. So after point of entry, then we've got readiness for practice. So this is when social work students have done their first year of training. They get assessed to see whether they're ready to go out in the field to practice. Then they practice in their second year and their first placement. And then in their final year, their second placement. And then again, they're assessed, are they suitable to qualify? And then once they've qualified, they work as a newly qualified social worker for some time and gain some experience. And then it's social work, and you can see experienced social worker, advanced social worker, and strategic social worker. And so the point at which international social worker will be recruited would be after social worker, kind of before experienced social worker. So they're required to have 2 or 3 years experience as a social worker. And I've put a link here, so afterwards you can go away and you can have a look at this framework in a little more detail. So with each domain, there are a set of, we call them capabilities. So there are a set of sentences, a set of statements about how, as a social worker, we demonstrate these, that we've met each domain. And so I'm just going to give you an overview of one of the domains, which is values and ethics. So if you can move over to the next slide, please. Okay, so that's just basically what I've just explained. So again, if we can just move forward again. And then again, please. Sorry, forward to the next one. And then forward again. Okay, so under our domain values and ethics, there is this statement, and I'll read it to you and then I'll explain what it means. So social workers have an obligation to conduct themselves ethically and to engage in ethical decision making, including partnership with people who use their services. Social workers are knowledgeable about the value base of their profession, its ethical standards and its relevant laws. And within that, when we say what does it mean to be ethical as a social worker, there are 3 main components that social workers have to sign up to and have to promote. So these are human rights, social justice, and professional integrity. So if you just click one forward, please, where one, click the mouse once, it should come up with another set. Good. Promoting human rights. So what does it mean as a social worker to promote human rights? So whatever service user we work with, we have a responsibility to promote their human rights, whether it's a 6-month-old baby or a 100-year-old elderly person. We have a responsibility to promote their human rights. So that means essentially that we have to respect them as themselves, respect them as a human. We have to respect their choices. And so we're not there as social workers. We can't enforce our own views on what a person chooses to do. Wherever in social work, when we work with our service users, we work alongside, we work with, we don't do to. So we have to respect that people have the right to make their own choices. And when we work in partnership. So whenever we do an assessment or a plan or a review, we constantly require to take into account the service users' views and include them in the decision making. And even if, for example, if they were they had a hearing impairment, we would be required to make sure that we communicate with them in the way that they can understand. So we might use British Sign Language. If they had a disability, we might use their communication style. So we might use PECS or Makaton, which are different communication tools. If they were a baby, a small baby that was pre-verbal, we'd be expected to use child observation. Or if they were from a different country and they didn't speak the language that we were doing the assessment in, we'd be expected to use a translator. So we're expected as social workers to remove as many barriers as possible when we're working. And when we assess, we have to not just take into account them, we have to take into account their community. We have to take into account the background that they're from, the community that they belong to, and the influences in society. So we're looking not just at the individual, but their family, their community, and also the society. We can just click again and move on to social justice. So we also have a responsibility as an ethical social worker to promote social justice, and this means challenging any discrimination we see. We're not allowed as social workers, and we have to actively challenge any discrimination that we see in relation to, for example, someone's skin colour or their age or their disability, if they have a disability, or their gender or their religion. So we have to make sure we actively work to remove any barriers that our service users might be facing because of injustices or discrimination. And then the last one, which is important, is professional integrity. So we have to make sure that we as social workers have good, strong integrity, and that means keeping our professional boundaries, keeping our confidentiality with the service user. Whenever we work with a service user, at the beginning of our relationship that we have with them, our professional relationship, we always have to tell them, whatever you say to us is confidential. We will not share it unless you are putting yourself at harm or other people at harm, and then we do have a duty to share it. But even then, with the information that we receive as social workers, often we're party to lots of information from different professionals. If it's a child, we might be party to information from the doctor, we might be party to information from the family, from the school, from the health visitor, for example. But when those professionals call us to seek information from us, we only share what they're required to know for their role. So we don't share all of the information. So we really have to make sure we make a judgment about what information we do and we don't share. So these are essentially ways that we can uphold our ethics and values when we're working in social work. Let's just move on to the next slide, please. So I said, if we can just click through all these, they're all showing, that's good, thank you. So these statements are the capabilities, so the sentences that are written under the ethics and values domain. So they're quite wordy and complex, but essentially I'll just give an overview of four main things. So whenever we make decisions, in order to be ethical, we have to take into account the law, that's the UK law, and our human rights framework. So to make sure that we're abiding by the legislation in relation to discrimination, in relation to rights and entitlements. And the second thing I'd like to explain is that when, as ethical social workers, we have to be really aware of our own self-values and make sure that we don't force these on our service users. So if I like to give an example, so for example, I might have a value that I think education is really important. And I think that any young person should get a good education. But then I'm working with a teenager who what they want to do is get a job. Their value is that they need to earn money. And while I can advise them and kind of say, okay, if you spend a little bit more time in education, you'll probably be able to get a better job at the end of it and you'll earn more money. That might not be the route that they want to follow. So my role will be to not impart my values on them, but to respect their values and help them, to empower them to get to the goal that they want to achieve. So it's really important that as social workers we have a good sense of ourselves. Every dilemma, every difficulty that we see for our clients and that we work with in casework, we have to be really constantly think ourselves, am I helping them to make an impartial decision, or am I imposing my own values on them? And this is what in social work supervision in the UK, this is a lot of things we will discuss with our managers. Why are we making those? Why are we going down that route for our social workers? Why this route other than a different route? Also, another thing would be participation. So as I said before, we have a responsibility to make sure that our service users can fully participate in the work that we're doing. So we're not doing to, we're doing with. So we're working in partnership with our service users. So we're not telling them, we're asking them what they want, and then we're helping them to empower them to get to where they need to be. And there's always a dilemma in that, and I think Anna mentioned that before. So our role ethically is to empower people, it's to help them be the best they can be, to show their best selves, to help them. Maybe they're vulnerable, they can't get to somewhere without being shown the way. But the other side of our role as social workers in the UK is we're agents of the state, so we're there to uphold the law. So if we're working with a service user and we know that they've broken the law, then we're in an ethical dilemma. You know, we that's why at the beginning of our relationship with them, we always spell out, okay, what you say to us is confidential unless you're going to put yourself or others at risk. And then we have to remind them of that and kind of go and act according to our profession and upholding our kind of ethics. And then the last thing I would say on that really is about information sharing and privacy. So there's strict rules in the UK around what you can and can't share about your service users. We have to maintain their confidentiality, and unless they're putting themselves or other people at risk, the information that they give to us has to remain confidential. And when I say confidential, I don't mean confidential just to me as a social worker, but it's confidential to our organisation. So as Anand and Niraj mentioned, every piece of work that we do, we have to record it, we have to make sure that it's stated on our client information system. So there's lots of recording in the UK. And we have to make sure that all of the information that we receive is on there. So that is kind of an overview of one of the domains. I mean, obviously there are 9 domains and it's not possible to go through them all in this webinar, but it gives you I mean, if you could spend some time looking at it, it would give you lots of information about how we frame our practice as social workers in the UK, because we know if we're following these guidelines, then we're working in the right way. Can we just move to the next slide, please? And the next framework, which is important, is the BASWA Code of Ethics. So BASWA is the British Association of Social Workers. And this Code of Ethics has been around since the 1970s. And it kind of, it's in line with the international definition of social work and the International Federation of Social Workers. So it's basically a code of ethics that members of BASWA, which is the Professional Association of Social Workers in the UK, sign up to, and it states how, if you like, it's as practice principles about how social workers agree to practice wherever they're working. So if we can just go to the next slide, please. And it's based on 3 core social work values. So we've got human rights, like I mentioned before, social justice and professional integrity. So within that, there's a set of 17 practice principles about how social workers will exercise these human rights, social justice and professional integrity in their day-to-day practice. So we thought it would be useful if Niraj and Anand just explain from their own perspective about how they use these professional practice principles in their day-to-day work. So I think I'm going to hand over to Niraj now, who's going to explain the first half of the practice principles. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you.
There are 17 ethical principles. There are some principles that overlap with each other. I'll discuss a few of them. First one is developing professional relationship. As Rich said, that it has to be properly defined relationship with service. For example, in the digital age, everybody is on social media, and there will be time when you will be having a good relationship with your service user, and you want to share some of your personal relationship, and that is going to be very, very difficult. But it can be a serious problem, and you can the regulatory authorities can revoke your license if you cross the boundaries. So it is important that you always maintain your professional relationship with your service user and colleagues and other professionals. Second one is assessing and managing risk. This is the day-to-day life of social worker. We have to be critically thinking and assessing risk every step of our journey with our service users. And for example, it is a key document for all the professionals who are working with adults. So I'll give you an example. If a young person is affiliated with gang and he's going missing, we have to, as a key person in young person's life, I will draw all the risks the young person is going to pose to himself and the community. I will have all the details in that document, and I will also have the triggers, how to manage them as well. And that document will be disseminated to all the parties who are involved with the young person. So it is important that you critically analyze all the risk and the consequences while working with the service users. The third one is acting with the informed consent of the service user, unless required by law to protect that person or another on risk of serious harm. As Rachel said, that we have to take consent of our service user. Whether a child is under 16 or an adult over 18, we have to have some sort of a consent or inform our service user. Although we have all the information of the service user, we only share the information with the minor at the time, limited the information to the party, not the whole file of the service users. If a service user is an adult, we need to have a written consent of the service user before we share the information. It is very challenging at times because you might find that some of the service users can risk to themselves or the community, and you would like to share the information, and your service user is adult. You have to be very, very careful of sharing information. So what we do in our day-to-day practice, at the beginning of our relationship, we have a document where we ask an adult to sign that if needed, we will be sharing your information with the parties which are working, only the necessary information. So the point of sharing information and is also overlapping to what I'm saying right now, and also providing information. Using authority in accordance with the human right perspective is basically what Rachel said earlier, is that we have to protect our service users human rights, regardless of race, gender, age, sexuality. We have to advocate them, and we have to put our own values aside and to support the service user. And we always try to empower our service user by providing them information, by providing their rights, so that they can advocate for themselves. And by doing that, it helps you to build a relationship with your service users. Sorry, I'm not sure what happened.
We have to wait for the presentation to come in, I think. It's
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, you have to empower your service user. You will have to work with your service user, not for service user. And it is very challenging to work with service user. At times, your service user might not want to work with you. But this is the thing, this is the qualities which are required as a social worker. No matter what are the traits of your service user, you surely advocate and build a relationship so you can work together. And challenging the abuse of human rights. So I'll give you an example. So for example, a child is living with a family, and there's an abuse going on, there's bullying. So we will have to, as a significant person in service user life, we will have to whistleblow the abuse going on in the family, and to protect the child and remove the child from the family. So this is our key role. And whistleblowing can be done for you as well as a social worker. So if your practice, somebody observes that your practice is unethical, they can whistleblow, and there can be a serious investigation lead after that whistleblow. There is a department in each local authority called LADO, who investigate the cases which are escalated by a young person or other professional for the social worker. So these are the 9 ethical, practical practice principles which I thought would be useful for you to know. I will forward the slide to Anand to discuss the rest.
Can you skip the slide, please? Next one. All right, okay. Thank you. All right, when we talk about ethical practice principles, it'll take me back to my education and social work training back in days. We learned about principles of social work. It's the same thing. I don't know if I need to go through everything in detail, because it's exactly the same thing, probably actually written down in a much more sophisticated way. But I still go through it. If anybody wants, if you want more information, I can go through it. Maintaining confidentiality, the first one. That's at number 10 in this slide. Any relationship, whether it is a professional relationship or any sort of interpersonal relationship, is actually based on confidentiality. Either it is written or it is actually not written. So breach of confidentiality actually collapses any relationship, in any sort of relationship. But in a social work practice, social workers are responsible to keep information about service users very safe. If you want to share some information about the service user, you need to get express consent, written consent, and you also need to keep disclosed records properly. Otherwise, you'll be in trouble. We are also bound to follow the European. It's called General Data Protection Regulation (GDPR), which actually instruct us about the confidentiality in a wider perspective. But each organization has their own confidentiality approaches towards client. There are situations like Neeraj said, we do share service users' information without their consent when the social worker feels that we have a reliable source to say that there is a situation where the services user himself is in a potential harm or others. So that's the time we actually share this information. This has been discussed by Neeraj very clearly. Maintaining clear and accurate recording is a part of social work. I don't really need to explain that to you because we all learn that as a part of principles of social work. But when you practice social work in the UK, you need to understand who is your client group. For instance, I work with children, so when I record, I should keep in my mind that these records at some point are going to be accessed by the children. So we need to record it in a way very clear so that they can understand. It has to be very clear, jargon-free, accurate records, and it has to be up to date. You cannot record something that happened last year. It has to be up to date. So every weekend is a hard work for social workers. We try to update our records by the end of this week, and otherwise we get people coming and knocking our doors on a weekly basis. We also record wishes and feeling of our client group. Either it is children, family, or group, we need to record their wishes and feelings, and we need to make sure that we have considered their wishes and feelings in our decision-making process. And also, all sort of communication needs to be recorded. For instance, a text message. Maybe a text message would be a turning point in a child's life, so you even are supposed to record a text message from a child. Next point, strive for objectivity and self-awareness. Self-awareness in social work practice is very important. Basically, you need to understand your capacity. If you're working, we learn about transference and stuff like that. When you know that you are not capable or you are not trained enough to do with a certain situation, you need to look back into your ability. If you are not capable of doing it, you need to really recognize that and approach your friends or colleagues, manager, to deal with that situation in an effective manner. Using professional supervision and peer support to reflect and improve practice. Supervision is a continuous process in social work practice in the UK. You meet with your line manager, your manager, on every 3 weeks. On a weekly basis. Every 3 weeks. Sorry. Can you hear me? Yeah. So supervision is an ongoing process. You discuss, you reflect, you bring a case to your supervision, you discuss about it, you try to get different views, you operate in partnership with your manager, sometimes with your colleagues, to understand and get a better way, to create a better way of approach. Sorry, next slides. We call it reflective supervision, actually. So no, don't go back to the previous slide, please. Yeah, thank you. Taking responsibility of their own practice and continue. Basically, you need to the same thing. It's actually overlapping because you need to understand as a social worker what kind of training required for you for your improvement. So on a regular basis, you have to discuss with your manager, find your training areas and access trainings, which is important for your practice. Contributing to the continuous improvement of professional practice. Social workers in the UK should strive to create conditions in employing agencies and in the countries where the principles of code of ethics are discussed, evaluated, and upheld in practice. We should engage in ethical debate with our colleagues and employers to share knowledge, take responsibility for making ethical, informed decisions. They should endeavor, social workers, we should endeavor to seek changes in policies and procedure, improve the service. So basically, you're continuously contributing as a social worker towards your profession for their improvement. The next point is, this is again overlapping, taking responsibility of one's training requirements. I'm not really going on that because we have discussed it. You just basically need to understand what is the practice wisdom you're supposed to achieve and what kind of trainings you require, and you go behind it and get trained. The last bit, facilitating and contributing to evaluation and research. Like I said earlier in my first bit of presentation, social workers should use professional knowledge and experience to engage in research and development. Basically, we provide the reports, our experience, to develop new policies, programs for our own improvement. We should also analyze and evaluate the quality of outcomes of our practice with people who use social work services. So these are basically the same thing, what, like I said, the same thing what we actually learned in universities about social work principles. So as I said, social workers is an evolving profession, and we keep adding up. There'll be changes into it as we learn more about it. Thank you. Rachel, next slide, please.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So we've discussed the Professional Capabilities Framework. We've discussed the Basel Code of Ethics. Now I'm going to just talk briefly about Social Work England and their professional standards. So Social Work England is our overarching body for social work in the UK. So Social Work England is the organisation that social workers need to be registered with in order to practice. So it's one thing having a qualification as a social worker, but unless you've actually registered with Social Work England and you're on the register of social workers, then you can't actually practice as a social worker. You can't use that protected professional title. And once we are on the register of social workers, so we've signed up to Social Work England, we're bound by their professional standards. And similar to the professional standards that we're required to follow in the PCF and the British Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics, professional standards, again, are a set of guiding principles about how we operate. I mean, it seems a little confusing that we've got 3, but actually they're all very increasingly similar, and they give you, as a social worker, a sense how to behave in each situation to remain within our boundaries of our profession. So there are 6 professional standards, which I'll just cover briefly. So the first one is we have to promote the rights, strengths and well-being of people, families and communities. So you can see there it's very similar to human rights that we mentioned earlier. So it's making sure that the service users that we work with are not discriminated against either by us or, as far as possible, by other parts of society, because by its very nature, social work does work with some of the most vulnerable clients in the country who don't have access to services, and we are there to help reduce that inequality. We have to establish and maintain the trust of people and the confidence of people that we work with. So all of the things we've mentioned about maintaining confidentiality, having a trusting relationship, not exploiting that, and being mindful that as social workers we have power and we shouldn't abuse that power. And being accountable for the quality of practice and the decisions I make. So I think we mentioned earlier about the individual responsibility that social workers are held to. So we're held to these professional standards, we're held to these code of ethics, and we're held to these the PCF. And if we as individual social workers don't fulfill those standards, then we can find ourselves in front of something called a fitness to practice panel. And that is essentially where if someone's raised a concern about our practice with Social Work England and that complaint has been upheld, social workers are invited to the panel and they have to explain their decision making, they have to explain their reasoning. And this arena is a public arena, so there's a website, all of the people that have the practice has been questioned, even if the panel hasn't been held yet, are on the website. People can go and Google, look at the regulation that they've broken. It may be that they didn't record the work that they've been doing. It could be that they haven't done things within timescale. It could be in their personal life. Something had happened that came into conflict with their professional values, and that was then out in the public arena. So it's quite a serious situation that we have to take our professional standards seriously. And the first one is maintain your professional development. So once you're on the register and you're a qualified social worker, you have to keep learning. You have to continue to gain your professional qualifications and your professional development. So we have to, as social workers in the UK, we have to re-register with Social Work England every 2 years. And at that point of registration, they look at your continuous professional development. They call it CPD. And they look at what training we've done in between, how we've managed to keep up to date with the changes in law or changes in policy and changes in practice. And we have to record all of that information on their database, and they will look at it when they give our renewal of our registration. And if we haven't done enough, they can ask us to do extra. So it's important that we take that seriously. The fifth one is we have to act safely, respectfully, and with professional integrity. So we've talked about before about managing risk. We've talked about acting confidentially and with professional integrity, keeping our professional boundaries. And the last one is promote ethical practice, so the ethical practice that I mentioned earlier, and report concerns. So if I'm a social worker and I'm working in a team, I might be practicing in an ethical way, but one of my colleagues might be, and I might see that. I have a responsibility to report that. If I don't report that through whistleblowing or through my manager, because often it could be about training and development for that person. It's our allegiances have to be to the profession. So if I don't report that concern, then I am also breaking my own professional standards. So it's important that we follow that as well. Next slide, please. So we can see, this is just recapping really on what I've already said. So Social Work England is a regulatory body of social work in the UK. We have to meet their professional standards, and if we don't, as social workers, we can find ourselves in front of a fitness to practice hearing, and ultimately we could lose our licence to practice as a social worker. So it's quite a serious set of standards that we have to sign up to and adhere to. Can I move to the next slide, please? So today, just to consolidate what we've talked about so far, we've looked at the PCF and I've given you a brief snapshot of one of the domains, which was ethics and values. There are 9 domains in total, so there are 8 others, which we didn't discuss. On the presentation, there's a web link to the other domains, so you can have a look in your own time and try and understand a little bit more about the standards that we're required to adhere to. We discussed the Basel Code of Ethics and how ethics and social work in England is based on human rights, social justice, and our professional integrity. And we talked about the professional standards that Social Work England has, which is our regulatory body. Now, we've got a few queries that have come in, and we're happy to answer questions and queries, which I know have been moderated by the group. I'm going to I'll take the first one, if that's okay. We've got a few. I think they've come through on our phones, Nirajananan. So the first one is, this is a question from Athul Samitha. My question is that in England, do the government have separate funding body or agency for research purposes in social work, and also the functioning of NGOs? So in England, I'll take that separately. So research and then money for NGOs. So in terms of research, most research around social work is done through universities, and the way that the universities are ranked, they get ranked according to their research profile. So the more research that is done, the higher the profile, the more highly regarded it is in the research community. So most of the research will be done by academics within universities, to answer that part of the question. In terms of funding, when funding is released by central government for a certain piece of research, then universities will put in bids for that funding. And the alternative route is maybe universities themselves will fund academics to, if they're, say, for example, doing a PhD, they'll fund them to do their research, and they will advertise studentships within their own university based on an area of their speciality. And then the other part, in terms of NGO funding, so we have we have funding that's released by the government, but that's usually devolved down to local councils. For charities, we call NGOs charities, to access. and the funding tends to be around key themes in society. So right now, for example, there's a lot of funding around knife crime in urban areas because that's a big issue in our young people is knife crime. So there's lots of funding around that. So it tends to be the funding that's released, which charities can access to work with young people who are maybe involved in gangs or knife crime or being criminally exploited, that charities will apply for that funding so they can do direct work with those individuals who are in that situation. So that's the government funding. And then also there's other funders such as the National Lottery, where charities can access funding through that. Mainly they're for kind of UK-based organisations. So that's the two things, for universities and for NGOs. I hope that's okay for that question.
Can I add a little bit
Yeah.
on that?
Yeah.
So there are research done department-wise as well. So the research are done within the department. So for example, we work with Home Office and they do research of, just giving you an example, that they're doing research of unaccompanied asylum seekers who got the status, who haven't got the status. So most of the practice-informed research are done within the department. And with regards to charities, there are, within the UK, there are, if you're creative enough, there are lots of funding for different things. And you wanted to, you have a idea, you write the funding, and you send an application to the party who will provide the funds. So there are lots of organizations such as Trust for London. This is just one example, who provide funding for the programs within the London. And so likewise, there are lots of funding available. There are links. There's a particular link you can access the funding for particular work or group, which we can share it at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
And I'll just add as well, so we've talked a lot in this presentation about how social workers in England, we're required to record our information, record our data. And the reason why we record it is because every local authority, every local council has to submit that information to central government. They put all the data together for the whole country, and they produce research reports. So it tells us trends, it looks at analysis, looks at what's happening in different parts of the UK, what the key themes are, what the key issues are that service users are finding when they come to us. So the research that they produce from that work, that drives the funding, what funding is allocated. Because if they highlight a particular need, they will offer funding around that to try and fill that social need and that gap. So it's kind of like a circular process, really. So that's probably important to add. Shall I move on to the next question?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the second question is, within the Indian context, although we have a code of ethics, there are no stringent regulations. Do you feel licensing of social workers will enhance the credibility and accountability of social workers? Should we all give our view on that? Do you want to say anything?
I think I would rather agree to it, actually speaking, rather than debating on it. Basically, if you've been given regulations, basically we don't have any regulations. Like I said earlier, each NGO, we work in non-governmental organizations, so each NGO has their own regulations and their own guidelines when it comes to social work practice. So we don't have a uniform regulations, and if you have uniform regulations, our profession will be recognized much more and it will be appreciated as well. And I think this has to come from a government body rather than NGOs setting up guidelines and rules.
I wanted to add on that what regulations, so for example, Children's Act 1989 gives us a clear guideline, clear set of rules, clear protocol. What are our roles to serve the community, to children basically. And that gives us confidence and transparency, and also, well, it held us accountable as well, whether we are actually following the guideline or not. And it is quite important, I think, to have a regulation, stringent regulation around the social work profession. Because transparency, if I'm not wrong, in India, regarding the funding and the way we work, the accountability, there's always an issue about transparency. And but here we cannot go outside our just if we do, then we are standing in front of disciplinary.
Yeah, can I thank you, Nourish and Anand. If I just add to that, in terms of the licensing part of the question, I think that what licensing gives us is a professional title. It's a protected title. So we're up there with, so for example, doctors, general practitioners have a protected title, and if they don't adhere to the guidelines of the General Medical Council, they'll find themselves similar to social workers in front of a fitness to practice panel. So having that kind of requirement to meet a certain set of standards, it gives us a certain amount of professionalism and a protected title. It's showing that not everybody can do this job. It's actually a very specialist role that requires a lot of skills and a lot of ability. So I think in terms of the profession, it gives the profession a lot more credibility. And a lot more, it should give the profession a lot more respect, really. That would be my view.
There are new laws coming, and there's a white paper submitted in Parliament to suggest that there has to be a regular examination or for the social worker to prove that they are fit to practice. So it is a very fluid, very ongoing, very progressive profession. We always welcome new things. So it is just not legislation. There are so many guidelines which form our practice, and that only comes when we have a clear set guidelines which are published just for the social work profession, and they are promoted by organizations such as BASWA or Social Work England.
Can we move on to the next query?
Yeah. So the next query is, what are the ethical dilemmas when practicing in England? So there are so many ethical dilemmas when practicing in England. I suppose, I don't know, give an example of one. Say I was working with a teenager as a social worker, and I know that using marijuana is against the law, against the law in England, but my teenager that I'm working with has a habit of smoking marijuana. It's kind of like always an ethical dilemma to engage that person, work with them, help them to choose other ways to use their free time that are more productive and better, but at the same time you've got that dilemma of working with someone that's breaking the law. So that's just a simple ethical dilemma, but there's so many in every day in our day-to-day practice, and of course
where we practice myself and Neeraj practice, we work with people who came to the UK claiming asylum, and for a fact that we know that most of them are smuggled to this country, and they owe money to certain people. And ever since they come to this country, they are on the run to repay this money. And we give them allowances for survival. And most of this money is going to the people who actually trafficked or smuggled them to this country. Even though we know that it is going, we have no choice but to give the allowance. So that is quite a difficult bit for us as a social worker.
And I wanted to answer Anil Sarve's question. Most of the research are done in a Western perspective, and in Western environment. The prime example is attachment theory. I'm not sure if you have read that theory, but it shows clearly that research and that theory is established in Western environment. But if we talk about Asian context or any other contexts, it is quite contradictory. And so what social worker and the profession do to you is it gives you lots and lots of information, and you can hold your own set of values. That doesn't mean you have to dismiss the rest of them. You take the other set of values equally and carry on working without disputing your own values. So it is quite challenging at times, because it depends on the environment you're born and brought up, and your own values, and what are really what challenge you. So there's a lot of information which you think that which might not aware. But what you can do is you can read those theories, you can get informed, and you will learn about different culture, and then you'll be able to practice with the client group.
Can I just add to that? Basically, in short, separating your personal values and ethical values from the professional values, and then work on it. So sometimes you actually, this line is very thin. Sometimes you actually step on both sides. So you should be very careful when you work in that kind of situation, especially as a social worker who came from India. I had the dilemma when, initially when taking my decision, and that's where we were talking about supervision and support from colleagues actually help you to lie down your professional ethics properly to deal with a particular situation.
So,
Rachel, you're mute.
Sorry. Shall I move on to what the next query is? What would your advice be to a social worker who is newly migrated to work in England? How do they get themselves settled and adjust to the new system and resources?
Is that for me?
For anyone. This is from Kiran Sasidaran.
Kiran, not too sure if you're here, but the first thing you need to do is to get yourself registered with Social Work England. And once you're registered as a newcomer, you'll get enough training. When you've been recruited to a local authority, you'll get enough training to be a part of the social work team. So we have a lot of support programs in any social worker who comes to the team. So that wouldn't be a problem. But first of all, you register yourself with Social Work England. And do you want to add anything? If not, the next query from Anne-Marie Joseph.
Just a bit when you come, you must be having a lot of anxieties on how I'm going to cope with the new environment. There are mandatory trainings you have to do before you even touch your caseload, and that will help you to understand some of the stringent policies and give you confidence. And also, your manager will have a supervision who understands your area of preference and your skill set. So your caseload will not be given complex from the day one. They will help you to progress. They will be with you throughout this journey. So there is a supervision, one-to-one. There is a group supervision. There is a peer supervision. So throughout your time, you'll never left alone to do the work, you'll be always feel supported in that sense.
Thank you. So that leads to the next question, really, which is the question is from Anne-Marie Joseph. Anne-Marie Joseph. It required to do a bridge course or diploma to practice social work in England, masters and social work graduate from India. So I'll just take that to start with. So no, once you've got your qualification in India, it will be seen as valid in the UK. But as Anand mentioned, and Niraj, the first step to be able to practice in the UK is to register with Social Work England. So they have a process for registering international social workers, and essentially what they do is they follow a procedure, and they look at your level of English language, and they look at the content of your degree and where you passed out from, where you graduated from, and they look at your experience. And it's called, they like scrutinise your career history, if you like. There's a fee for that. They charge, I think, £495, but there's a clear guidance and process of how they would go through that scrutiny. I'll post the link within the chat, and you can have a look at that in your own time. But that, if you go to that link, it will tell you how to register as a social worker from overseas in the UK.
Because I don't know how things work now. When I came to the UK, we have a different body, actually regulated social workers, which is called GSC, General Social Care Council, where you have to complete a form where you have to demonstrate that you actually meet with core competencies to work as a social worker in the UK. I don't know, we still have to follow that procedure, but I believe that you need to really demonstrate that you're qualified to work in the UK.
Thank you. Okay, next question we've got from Anita Mercado. Sorry about the pronunciation if I'm not pronouncing things right. I'm trying. With the current emphasis on outcome-based education following global standards, do you feel the social work academic institutions in India are preparing the students to meet the global standards? What are some of your suggestions, social work academic institutions in India, in the area of curriculum and skill development to meet the global standards? Well, I'm personally, I'm not too aware of what the current standards are in India. So in terms of being able to answer that question, I think what's important to know whenever you do that exercise is to obviously know your core competence or the standards you're working to at the moment, know where the bar is, where the target is to meet the international standard, and then do a mapping exercise to look at the gaps. And when you analyse the gaps, you can look at what other countries are doing to kind of inform your own good practice about how you think you can improve things based on the context. But Anand and Neeraj might have something else to add to that.
Sorry, go on, Anand.
Yeah, having trained in India, I can say that both the kind of education what we receive in India is not really, it's actually at par. We learn exactly the same thing, the theories, technique, the skills. If we get all these things when we are qualified from India, and it is in global standard, I would say. The problem is when we come out, we don't have a platform to practice it because we are not regulated properly. That's where I find that we are not really using our skills and qualities when we come out of it, especially theories and stuff like that. So I don't think we are actually behind when it comes to social work training in India, because we have access. For instance, the kind of access we have. When I was a student 20 years ago, I couldn't even think about accessing something on an international platform. Now look at that. We are sitting in different places of the world that students can access information from all over the world. Our information was limited to the library, but now we can access anything possible. And students need to be equally creative as their professors and tutors. So this will help them to get an international exposure, and these kind of webinars will actually help you to actually sort of widen your area of education and move on. Neeraj.
I think just for an example, what we discussed in this webinar and what Rachel shared about PCF framework, I believe that trained in the UK, that really shaped me inside out. All of my values, pretty much everything, it changed me inside out. So I think to be able to do that, all the institutions should be ready to adapt and equipped for the new learning and from research or standards, learn from different countries, and to embed in their own practice. Just for an example, I'm not sure what kind of safeguarding trainings social workers are getting in India, but the safeguarding training has been reformed literally every after 5 years here in the UK, and it is so sharp that we have a clear guideline for all the professionals how to safeguard our service users. It's just a small example, and I think there's so much things institutions can embed in their curriculum, which is easily available online, like and it's important that there should be some sort of creative module where you learn, pick a country and learn from their practices, their key practices. I think each institution should take that initiative.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Can you share the activities conducted in colleges for understanding the research and social work methods for students in England? Yes, I'm sure we'd be happy to do that. It's kind of a big topic, which we might need to discuss outside of this meeting. But basically, everything that's taught in UK colleges and universities in England around social work is based on that professional capabilities framework standards that we've been through. So we do lots of exercises in universities around helping students to identify themselves, their own values, their own ethics, how they would react in different situations. We do a lot around communication, how to deal with difficult situations, as Neeraj said, safeguarding, really trying to unpick what our inherent values are that we may not be aware of until we've actually been through this training. So we may not even be aware that we're being discriminatory based on our own values and the way we've been brought up and our own families. And it's only when you kind of unpick that through the training that you can make more of an alignment between the professional standards and yourself as a person. I think most students in England, when they start their social work training, it's disjointed between, okay, they kind of get the sense that, okay, this is how I need to be in work and this is how I am at home. And there's kind of definitely a disjointedness. But then as time goes on and they get more skilled in their profession and they finish their training, those two things come closer together, much closer together. And often, I've seen students who start a course in a particular situation, home situation, and by the end of it, they're in a completely different situation because the values that they had just weren't compatible with where they wanted to be as a person, so that they've changed their whole life. So, there's lots of practical exercises and interactive topics that are done to try and unpick how we need to practice as social workers in the training. But definitely, it's very interactive. Would you like to add anything? Yeah?
There are lots of online tools because I'm a children practitioner. There are lots of online tools available to work with different service users. For example, if somebody is autistic and there's a lot of research done how to engage a autistic child into a conversation. So there are lots of tools available for different scenarios online. Maybe I can share it later after the presentation, those tools. Yeah.
Perfect. And then we've got, what is the role and contribution of social workers in policy formation in the UK? Any example, please? So I would... Go on, sorry, Anand, would you like to... I suppose there's two things that I can think of. So one would be, which is kind of covert really, it's not an active thing that the social workers are doing because it's just part of their day-to-day role, but as we mentioned before, as you record information on your because you're working at an individual level, working with social workers, you're working with young people or families or individuals or adults, whatever, so you're recording your interactions on a day-to-day basis as a social worker. All of that information is collated together, it's sent to central government, and that has a key impact on policy and how policy is developed, because policy is developed based on research, and so that's one way. And then the other way I would say that some social workers do is in our government, the way that ministers and MPs get their debate ideas and they bring things to Parliament, they're kind of by their constituents. So people in a local area will complain to their MP about something and it becomes an issue for them. And then the MPs are guided by different systems, like one is an all-party parliamentary group. So there's all-party parliamentary groups, and they're groups essentially that you can go to as a social worker to input into the debate about particular issue. So for example, there's an all-party parliamentary group for children, and at the moment there's a big issue around unregulated placement. So with local authorities, councils are placing children in settings that are unregulated. So as a social worker, you could go to that all-party parliamentary group and you could present your ideas to an MP or a local councillor about what you found in your work, and that would be a way that you would be directly influencing policy. So there are ways that you can have more of an active input, or even without an active input, you're still having some contribution to policy in your day-to-day work.
And can I just add that, when universities and researchers carry out their researches, they'll consider social workers and client groups as sample sizes. So we'll directly involved by providing our inputs in their research programs. So that will also be considered in formulating policies in the UK.
And also, just not on a very serious note, there are policy changes because of the serious case reviews. There are examples of bad practices and where we fail to protect the child, and there has been child deaths. Those cases have seriously impacted social work practice in the UK, and they have changed the whole dynamics of social work environment. And there are lots of serious case reviews done. There are books written and on those serious case reviews, so that the professional can learn from that example. And that can be found online, and we can share those cases at the end of the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, what is the minimum eligibility to register as a social worker in England? So this link that I posted previously gives the full details about what the requirements are, but just as an overview, I think you need to have an IELTS score of at least 7. You need to have graduated in the last 5 years, and you need to have been able to evidence that you train in your own native language. They were the 3 key things that I picked up when I had a quick look through the links. But the link that I've pasted in the chat does give a proper full overview of what's required, and what they'll also scrutinise your transcript and the content of your course to see whether it's the extent to which it's compatible with the UK training. Anything else to add to that one? No, we're okay. Next question is, what are the expectations and responsibilities of global social workers after the outbreak of COVID-19 ends?
I mean, this is I would start that. Each, for example, I work with a set client group, and I have responsibilities. My practice has changed during this pandemic. I used to see them once in 6 weeks. I now see them online once in 2 weeks over the phone. So that has changed. But after the COVID-19 ends, to be honest, I don't know. We have started to normalize our practice by doing face-to-face visits, but taking full precautions so that we don't put anybody in danger. I think it will take time to normalize into practice where we were previously.
can I just add, what we are planning to do as an organization? We are going to carry out risk assessment on ourselves to see how vulnerable we are towards COVID-19 due to underlying health issues. That's one thing. We also carry out risk assessment on our clients to see how vulnerable they are. So we actually come up with a practical approach when the COVID-19 ends, and then it will be a gradual going back to the normal practice.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. I mean, there have been a couple of social workers that have, a few social workers, not a huge amount, not as many as nurses, but a few social workers that have passed away in the UK from COVID-19. And that's just obviously very sad when you hear about someone from your own profession. But I think, it's around making sure we wear PPE, protective equipment, that we ensure social distancing, as Anand said, and Neeraj said, it's just about making sure that we adapt our practice to help reduce the risk for both the service users but also for ourselves. And we're kind of reassessing after every release of government guidance, just like every country is, I guess, in terms of the way we're operating, and we're kind of having to adapt and change based on every new piece of guidance that's released. And I think we've got a final question, have we, or is that the last one? Oh, okay, got another one. How far is research integrated into practice? Do practitioners in England are they involved in conducting research and writing research papers? Sometimes universities will be doing a research project and they will want the views of frontline practitioners. So the university would be leading the research project and practitioners would be involved in that research. To do actual research in terms of, rather than be a participant in the research but actually lead the research, I wouldn't say that that's something that would normally be in the social work role. It's normally somebody who's been a social worker and then moved up higher into their profession. Maybe they've started working in the university, or they're doing something which is slightly out of the day-to-day practice, because the day-to-day practice, you'd probably just be able to be a participant in research but not actually lead research, because the two roles are very distinct and different. Do you want to add anything?
No.
So each local authority is linked with the universities. We get students from them. So sometimes the academics, they do come, and if the research done on social workers, the invite is sent out. Whoever wants to participate in the research, we can give our practice experience. Otherwise, like Rachel said, that social worker role doesn't require to do research.
Oh, thank you. I think that's it from everybody.
And as we said, if you have more queries anytime after this meeting, our email is provided there. You can drop an email and we'll try and answer the question.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for your time and for joining the webinar today. It's been wonderful to speak to you all. Thank you.
Thank you to all the participants who joined this presentation.
Just a second, Neeraj.
Yeah.
Thank you, team, for clarifying the points. I hope your knowledge and experience shared help all of us to set our targets and to explore the field of social work. It was very insightful for us to know more about competencies in England, and also it will be really useful for the students who like to work abroad as a social worker. So thank you for your valuable time and your insightful words. And thank you for being with us. Now, I invite Dr. Elsa, Assistant Professor of Bharathion School of Social Work, to deliver more of thanks.
Dear Rachel, Neeraj and Anand, it was indeed a great opportunity to listen to Kumar's webinar series from veterans in the field of social work, education and practice. 2 decades of professional experience is not a simple thing. We are greatly contented for having accepted our thought on this move and decided upon sharing your experience and expertise. I warmly acknowledge your promptness and willingness to support us in this venture. Thank you, Rachel, Neeraj and Anand. And on behalf of Bharat Mother College and Bharat Mother School of Social Work, and each and every participant present here, I extend a heartfelt thanks to you. Thank you so much.
I would say thank you for this opportunity, seriously. We
Yeah,
also enjoyed it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so
It's
much.
been wonderful.
Yeah.
Are we allowed to leave now? I think so.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Now, our international webinar has come to an end. Thank you all for the active participation. Once again, I remind you to fill the feedback form circulated through the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, I know.